the one you might sell it.
That's it.
And talking about that too, we have a heap of clients that have made hundreds of thousands of dollars based on that. So,
literally, we had a client we were talking to, I think it was last week or at the start of the week or something, and they built about 6, maybe 8 months ago, and they're selling their home and made what was it, $900,000 profit within 6 to 8 months.
Yeah.
Three, 2, 1.
Go.
Hello and welcome back to the #1 home building podcast in Australia. This week we are talking all things Knockdown Rebuild. So this is going to be a very exciting episode. Knockdown Rebuild is getting so popular nowadays. So it's going to be really great to dive in a little bit more about what is Knockdown Rebuild and what is the process of it as well, and things to look out for. But without further ado, let's kick it off introducing ourselves. Did you want to kick us off?
Chris Baptista, the director of Homes By CMA, one of the biggest and best builders in Queensland.
Love it. And I am Jaden Peters. I am the marketing manager for CMA. So for people who don't really know necessarily what Knockdown Rebuild even is.
That's actually the first thing, it's a good point.
What is it? That's probably the best place to start, right?
As the name suggests, is you either have a block with a house on it or you are about to buy one.
That's it.
And you pretty much demolish the house to build a brand new one on that block. So that's what a knockdown rebuild is.
Love it.
As opposed to, I guess most of what builders do nowadays are brand new land developments. There's 200 blocks and you build on a brand new block of land when nobody has built before.
That's it. And then of course you've got the other alternative, which is more the renovation route.
Renovation is also, so there's a few things you can have a house and renovate it. And sometimes you have to do this, as we'll talk about, because there's no other option. But most of the times you can demolish the house and build a new one.
Awesome. So let's start with some of the pros of why you would want to knock down rebuild as opposed to renovating.
So the first thing is, and this is why a lot of builders don't do renovations, a renovation is always very complicated. There's always unknown which are not known until you might pull out a wall and you're going to find out that the plumbing is all destroyed and you got to replace it. So basically this all leads to very expensive.
And it's time consuming as well.
It's time consuming, it's very
stressful.
expensive. And I wouldn't even know where to start as to comparing cost versus a new home, but it would easily be double the cost.
For sure.
And the problem you have with that is not only it's going to be more expensive, but you never get what you want. So if the house has got lower ceiling, you could raise that up, but again, you're talking a whole different ball game in cost. And you are just stuck with some things, and that's what's really annoying about it.
On that, the research when I was looking at this before we started this podcast, that they actually said that it is common for extensions and renovation projects to often be 50% more expensive to build than homes that are brand new on a square meter basis.
Oh, no, it'd be more than that, I reckon. Yeah. That's assuming, I'd say, that it's a pretty stock standard renovation. You might have a bathroom, you renovate it, it's not too bad. But if you are renovating a whole house, for example, it would easily be $2,000 a square meter. Easily. Yeah.
Insane.
Yeah.
Cool. So obviously we spoke about some of the benefits. Are there any, I guess, cons to knockdown rebuild?
I mean, yes, the cons sometimes is not only the process, because obviously you have to demolish a house and you have to build a new one. So obviously that's not as easy as you get a brand new block of land and here you are, you get the survey pegs, you get sewer, you get water, you get electricity, you get a whole lot.
Yeah.
A knockdown rebuild has a lot more things that could go wrong. It's a little bit like a block renovation, sort of, where you really have to watch what's on that block so that you don't get any surprises.
For sure. I guess that's one of the most important things is you want to make sure that there is no hidden things.
Definitely. And most of the information is available or can be made available with a small fee through a council or a town planner. So usually that information can be made available quite easily.
For sure. Awesome. So let's start right at the beginning. So if someone's got a house and they're like, We absolutely love the area. We're struggling to find a spare block of land at the moment. Our next best option is we want to stay in this area. We want to knock down and rebuild our house. What's their next step? What's the first step they need to do?
So it can go in a few directions, and there's a few steps you have to watch, obviously. And I guess the first thing you should do is either speak to your town planner, depending on what you want to do with the block. And what I mean by that is some people might have a 20-meter wide block in Brisbane, and yes, you might want to keep that 20-meter block to yourself, or you might want to cut that block in half and have two houses. One you might live on, and the other one you might sell it.
That's it.
And talking about that too, we have a heap of clients that have made hundreds of thousands of dollars based on that. So,
literally, we had a client we were talking to, I think it was last week or at the start of the week or something, and they built about 6, maybe 8 months ago, and they're selling their home and made $900,000 profit within 6 to 8 months.
Yeah, that's it. So that's pretty
insane.
That's pretty insane. But also assuming it's the perfect timing. It's June 2021. It's the perfect timing to sell a house. It's not the best timing 100%. To buy a block, but it's the perfect timing to sell a house right now. So,
it's getting harder and harder to find the right block. So I think a lot of people are resorting to
definitely. So long story short, it very much depends what your intention is with a block. If it's one that you want to subdivide, speak to your town planner first. They will advise, and that's what's hard sometimes. Once you start going into what's called a development approval, which is different to building approval. So development approval is what you would need to subdivide a block into.
For sure.
And that needs to be handled by a town planner. It can get very complicated. The applications are quite complicated too. So you really want someone that has the expertise to handle this. That's option one, obviously. Option two is you might have, say, a 12 or 14-meter wide block. You want to keep it and build a house for yourself. I would say the first thing probably to do would be to go and speak to a builder, because a builder or multiple builders, obviously, if you want to get a few quotes around, because that builder will be able to provide you with free information and free advice as to what you can do from that point. Is it nice and straightforward, or is it going to be a little bit more complicated, and you might have to employ a town planner to get a DA to get through all that?
That's it. And I would even recommend doing a little bit of research about the area, and maybe even talking to some real estate agents to ensure that you're not going to overcapitalize when you're building that home, right?
Definitely. This is a prime one. And not only that, but talking to the neighbors is really good. For example, Sandgate, we're building a lot in there, and you buy a block of land, but you speak to your neighbor and you have a look at their house, and the house seems to be raised 1.2 meter high. And you're like, that's weird, because it seems to be all the houses on the street. It's not a coincidence. It's because there's a minimum flood height, and we have to comply with that minimum flood height. So already by just speaking to your neighbor and assuming they've built a newish house, you would already know quite a bit of information. Same in terms of soil test. How was your soil? All that sort of thing. So real estate agents, builders, town planners, because usually advice is free. And that's what's so good about, I guess, the world nowadays. I guess you can just ask. People would usually give you free information, and then obviously expect some kind of return at some point. But it's free information at first. So
for sure. Cool. So we've come this far. You've established what you needed to build. You've worked out all the things you need about the block. Now it's time for demolition.
That's it. So, and we'll go back to another part, but first we'll go on to demolition. Because you don't want to do the demolition before you sort out a few things. But
that was my next thing.
We'll go to that after, I think, because there's just so much, I guess, in terms of knockdown, so rebuild. And that's one of the con, I guess, is there is a lot to watch for. And we'll talk about this after we talk about demolition, I think. But demolition is pretty straightforward to a certain extent. You obviously... A builder is usually not going to do the demolition for you. So yes, you can ask for advice and ask for, who do they know, but usually the builder will not do it. There's specialized demolition company, and there's a lot of them that will do it for you. So the best is, you get a few, maybe get 3 quotes.
Yeah.
Be specific as to what you want demolished. Driveways, the concrete path on the side. There's a block fence there that you want removed. So be very specific.
100%.
And make sure they take care of the approval to get the demolition done, because you can't just go out there and demolish a house. And we'll talk about that a little bit later. And yeah, obviously, just make sure they include everything. Make sure they include the approval, and make sure they have a look to see if there's any asbestos, because that could escalate the cost too.
If there's any trees on the property that they also need to remove.
Trees are another one, and again, we might talk a little bit about that later. But that's one thing you really have to watch with a knockdown rebuild. Again, it's not as straightforward, and there's a lot of things you need to worry about. But demolition is usually pretty easy. You get your approval. Anywhere between $15,000 to $30,000 is the demolition cost. Depending, obviously, if you're going to demolish a 5-story apartment building, it's going to be a bit more, but most of the houses would be about that. Watch too, because sometimes some of those Queenslanders can be removed, and they might even pay you.
That's it. Yeah, they'll do it
for free.
Yeah,
that's it. Yeah. So we've had that a few times too, where if the condition of the house is not too bad, and they can just put it on a truck and remove the house, they might actually even pay you to remove that house.
100%. It'd be way easier, a lot cheaper.
Then it's a dream.
And you can save that money and you just put it straight in.
Then it's a dream. That's it.
Right? Cool. So we mentioned that obviously it's not as easy as it may sound. There are a lot of things that we need to tick off, like, we've got the heritage possibilities, the bushfire, all of that. Did you just want to talk about a little more of the complicated side of that?
Yeah. So it already starts a little bit when you demolish the house. And again, something you want to make sure that the demolition company does is, or at least organizes for you or tells you how to organize it, is when you have a house, you got to imagine you've got your sewer, you got your electricity, you got your water, and you got your gas. Sometimes you might not have natural gas, but sometimes you do. So you got to make sure that when the house is demolished, that all those connections are kept off. So make sure, and it's very specific to the areas, it's very specific in terms of forms that you might have to give to a council. So best to speak to the demolition company, and they would usually advise or help you in terms of capping of services.
Awesome.
Again, it can get a little bit tricky. For example, where you might have bought a knockdown rebuild block. So you might have bought where there was a double block, they've cut that block in half, and you've got the block on the left. Now, really be careful, because you have to assume this was one house. So there's usually one water meter, one sewer point, and one obviously electricity point, but this is not as bad. So have a look at your block, the one that you bought or are going to buy. Does it have a sewer connection? Because if it doesn't have one, it is quite costly. And that's basically, to make it really easy to understand, all your toilets and so everything to get you the sewer, it goes through what's called a sewer house connection. And they are not standard, and they are not free to install, and a plumber can't just go on site and install one. So make sure there's a house connection, and make sure there's a water meter. The water meter usually is not as bad, but it can range from $1,000 to $2,000, I guess.
Perfect.
So that's already in terms of demolition side of things. Make sure everything is capped off, and make sure that the block you bought, if it is a subdivision of 2 or 3 blocks, make sure that your block has all the infrastructure to build a house.
Love it. So we've talked a lot about like the sewer and everything. Obviously, there's other factors that you need to take into account. So like council compliance, covenant compliance, if you may have something like that.
Well, covenant wouldn't apply necessarily to a knockdown rebuild unless you are knocking down a house into a newish estate, which would be a little bit weird. But always have a look anyway.
Is there, what else have we got that they need to also keep in mind and consider?
So there's a lot.
That's what I mean. There's so much. Like, where do you start?
There is a lot. And that's why you really have to do your research, whether you do it yourself. And I would always recommend people to do the research themselves.
Definitely.
Because at least when you're going to speak to a few builders, you might get a bit more information, but at least you have done your research and you know what you're talking about.
100%.
So usually, websites, council will have most of the information. And websites, if you are building in Brisbane, PD Online in Brisbane, if you type PD Online on Google, you will have a link and you can go on there. It's a council website with free information. And PD Online Moreton Bay also has that. And there's what we call a sort of a a building overlay. And what that tells you is all the things that are impacted on your block.
Yes.
And there's a lot. Now, most of those blocks wouldn't have everything, but there's a lot from the character building. This is a prime one where, and again, when we talked about demolition, and you have to do your research before, because if the house is, for example, pre-1946, you might not even be able to demolish that house, and you will have to do a renovation. For example, you might be able to extend the back, do a few things, but that's as far as they're going to be able to let you do. So always do your research before you demolish a house, like we said.
Yes.
But even if you're able to demolish the house, but there's that overlay, you will have to build a new house to certain standards that are going to make council.
Yeah.
And I know it's starting to get a little bit technical, and I'll try to keep it easy. But once it gets to, for example, a character sort of overlay, you have to employ a town planner. Because again, it's quite tricky, and a town planner will do an application with your plans and a bit of a spiel that they do as to why your house is compliant. They run that pass through council, and they get your house approved. So again, this is different to a building approval. You get your DA first, and then you get your BA, your building approval.
Perfect.
But character building means that you might have to be very restricted in terms of your roof lines, your facade, the windows that you use, the roof materials that you use. So you might want to build a house in Hamilton and say, oh yeah, I'd love to build a super modern house on our block. And unfortunately, you might not be able to.
Yeah.
So always do your research in that. And those sort of overlays can escalate quite quickly into things like acoustics.
Yeah.
Is there a sort of airport? Is there a train station next to it? Or is there a busy road? So acoustics.
Busy road, traffic control as well. You'd have to take
Traffic control is something that most people don't think about. They look at the street, it's busy, that's great. But from a builder's point of view, we have to build it.
That's it.
Or from a demolition point of view, they have to demolish it. So when a street is really busy, we have to have traffic control, and that, again, can escalate pretty quick. It can go anywhere between $2,000 if that's not much required, up to $10,000, $15,000 if there's quite a bit of traffic control that is required.
If you ever want a cool thing to watch on YouTube, just type in house like transportation or removal, where they like literally put a house on a truck and move it from point A to point B.
I used to see those shows on.
It's epic. It's pretty cool.
It's pretty. The one they do in America is quite cool. Like those big trucks. Oh my god, like it's so cool. And I've seen one where they've transported churches and stuff.
Oh wow.
Yeah, it's pretty cool.
Pretty insane. Hey. Yeah. All right. So you've done all your research, and I'd love to get your opinion on this. Would you have a building contract in place prior to demolition or after?
No, you can have a building contract prior to the sub-demolition, and it doesn't really stop. It doesn't stop. You can't, I guess, get your building approval if the house is not demolished, really. But you can get a contract done. Be mindful, though, that usually always try to get a soil test done before the house is demolished if you want to get a contract. Most of the time, there's space on the block to get at least a borehole. That's what it's called when you do a soil test. You normally do 2 boreholes. So there's usually space to do one at the front or maybe at the back. And normally that's another thing you have to watch for. When the house is demolished, you have to do another soil test.
Yes, definitely.
And it is another thing to watch for, which you don't necessarily get in a new land estate. You got to imagine that there was a house on that block, so you got to imagine all the pipes were in the ground. The house has been removed. The soil has been disturbed, and the soil test would most likely come back as a P class, which is a problem site. Now, don't stress, because it doesn't mean that it's going to be another 50,000. It could be, but it doesn't mean that. Most of the time, it doesn't mean that. All it means is that there might be a bit of fill present on that block, and usually what I say is allow at a bare minimum on a knockdown rebuild peering to 1 meter deep. Because usually drainage might go to 600-ish deep. So if you have an allowance in your head, or you ask your builder to allow for that, it would be safe. Again, a soil test, like we've said before, is very specific to the site. You could have a block here and you could have the block next door, and both would have a different soil test. Although it should be similar, it could be slightly different. So always allow for some peering when you have a knockdown rebuild too.
And the other thing I can think of that might impact it as well is that generally when you're building a house, in terms of approvals and council and things like that, it is often a little bit quicker as opposed to something like a knockdown rebuild.
Yes, and that's why it's important to get all the information, because where it can sometimes take longer is we find out information that we didn't know before.
Yeah.
And basically we might have to change the plan. So prime example is, and again, watch this if you are doing a knockdown rebuild, is a sewer line.
I knew he was going to say sewer.
Yes, sewer line. The sewer line is the devil in terms of knockdown rebuilds. So because those blocks have been built so long ago, literally it could be hundreds of years ago, some of the sewer lines just run in the weirdest location in your block. So that might mean a few things, that you have to either keep the house away from that sewer line if you don't want to have any other cost.
Yeah.
But most of the time where the sewer runs in the middle of the block, you have to build over that. Yeah. And it's possible, as long as you stay away from the manhole and you stay away from the sewer house connection that we talked about before. Yep. You can build over the actual sewer line, and you have to do what's called a build over sewer sort of application with council, which they charge a fee, obviously.
Yeah, yeah.
And
of course they do.
That's exactly right. So you have the cost of the council fees, maybe a bit of a certifier fee because all the so documents have to be lodged. Yeah, yeah. And from a builder's point of view, I guess what has to happen is when we build a house over a sewer, most people think, well, what's so special about it? You know, the sewer runs under, that's great.
Yeah, yeah.
But what we have to do is, and I might take a little example, but if this is your slab that you're going to put over the pipe that's here, basically the slab and the soil on top of it cannot have any weight on that sewer pipe. So what we do, if the pipe is here, we would put concrete piers or screw piers either side of that sewer line, and obviously keeping a certain distance from that sewer line, so that no matter what happens, that slab has no weight on the sewer line and pressure on that sewer line. So usually engineers do what's called bridging. And pretty much, you sort of bridge your foundations and your slab so that you don't put any weight on top of that.
Awesome.
So be mindful when you have a sewer line, keep away from the manhole, keep away from the house connection, but you can build over a sewer line, but it will cost a little bit more.
Awesome. So there are some great things to consider. We've, planned this out. We've demolished our house. Now let's move on to the build.
Yes. So before we even get onto that, people are going to think, oh my God, knockdown rebuild is so confusing. It's not that bad. As long as you know the information, that's what's good about a podcast. You can rewatch it.
That's it.
We might also do a bit of a flyer at some point and put that on a website, and
sounds good.
Hopefully soon.
Yeah.
One other thing is, so again, imagine that your block is 200 years old. It's been sitting there. A block has obviously four corners or multiple corners if it's on an angle, but usually, let's say, four corners. For a builder to place a house spot on that block, we employ a surveyor who will put survey pegs so that the house is millimeters where it should be. Now, to do this, we need to know exactly where the boundaries of that block is. And if your block is usually a knockdown rebuild, there's no recent survey on it. So what you have to do is you have to do what's called an ID survey. And the surveyor will pretty much look at your block, find the closest reliable datum point, and pretty much redo the boundaries based on that data point, so that's the house is going to be built where it is built.
And millimeter specific.
And that's crucial. That is crucial because, and most, even if your builder say, it'll be fine, the certifier will pick on it. That's a bad imitation of builders, but all good. And again, if you have bought a block that is, for example, subdivided into, and you bought the block on the left-hand side, usually the person that has done the subdivision during the council application would have had to get an ID survey. So always ask them for it because it will save you money when you go to the builder. But if you have to get a builder or if you have to get a surveyor to get one for you, usually anywhere between $2,500 to $3,000 will get you a survey. And basically they just give you the boundaries, put 4 white pegs on your corners, and that's it.
Yeah.
And you get a piece of paper that says this is your block.
Yeah.
But at least the good thing is if something happens at any point in time, and again, because those blocks are getting narrower and narrower, you will not have any issues with a neighbor that says, well, your eaves are on my block. And you see that a lot. We see that a lot when we build knockdown rebuilds, and the neighbors' eaves are sort of encroaching.
Yeah,
But
like dangling over a little bit.
That's it. And that's because it's just not accurate. So
Yeah. Perfect. So now we move on and it comes time to choosing a builder. Now, obviously, if it's a knockdown rebuild, they can often be a little bit of a unique block, whether it may be a little bit narrow or sloping or something like that. So that rules out instantly a lot of builders, right?
That's it. So the big builders, as much as, they might be sometimes good at what they do, and knockdown rebuilds will work for them, and a lot of them do a lot of marketing on that sort of things.
Definitely, especially at the moment, eh?
Especially at the moment, because land is not available. And that's another great thing about knockdown rebuilds, because you can't find land, but you can find an old house that's for sale and you might be able to demolish.
Definitely.
But yeah, some of the really large builders, because they've got set plans and can only make so many changes, it very much restricts how many knockdown rebuilds projects that they can take. And as soon as all the boxes are not ticked, unfortunately, they will not be as suited. And
I guess the thing is that for a builder, knockdown rebuild is considered a very taxing on the resources for the building company.
For sure. I mean, even just in terms of building, you just got to watch so many things, and you might get surprises too. And again, that's why I'm very big on you have to get the information, because you might get a sewer line and the plan shows the house connection is here, and you're about to start digging, you're about to connect to drainage, and you find the house connection is not there.
Yeah.
So always good sometimes, depending on how the sewer line is, you get a sewer inspection too. You should be able to get that for less than $1,000, and they send a camera down there. They show you the state of the sewer line, and they show you exactly where the house connection is. So there's, with a knockdown rebuild, if you don't do all your research and you don't have everything 100% planned, there's always something that could go wrong somewhere. Yeah,
that's it. Like, prior planning prevents piss poor performance.
Definitely.
Right? That old saying.
Definitely.
But yeah, that's it. Just plan it out. So we come to our builder, and why is it important to necessarily choose the right builder?
I guess, well, first of all, if you have someone who has no experience with them, they're just going to have no clue. Like, it's
good luck.
As easy as that. We have a showroom packed of people for those that...
Yeah, if you're wondering what that background
are hearing noises. So where was I with this? Well, if they don't know what they're doing, it's... As you've seen in that podcast, there's a lot of knowledge in the knockdown rebuild. So it's not as easy as here's a brand new block of land and we're going to build a house on it. So picking the right builder that has the experience is very important. And also, I guess what we were talking about is, as soon as the block gets a little bit too complicated, and for example, your block might have 2 meters of fall, and you might have to maybe change to a split level home.
Yes.
You sort of have to take all the really big builders out and go to a custom home builder. So I personally feel like custom home builder is more suited to a knockdown rebuild.
Agreed.
And there's quite a few usually around, because of the fact that your knockdown rebuilds, you might just have to customize the house, whether you have a sewer line there and you might have to trim something, or you have a split level home, or like the ones that we're talking at sand gates, that have a minimum flood height, and you have to raise the house up. And those really big builders are not going to do this. So another thing to watch out for, like we're talking about in Sandgate, is you might have a minimum flood height, and that happens a lot. So it's basically the council will give you, and it's usually council that has those, and you can go on FloodWise and just get that minimum height where your slab has to be. But sometimes you might have a minimum height, and you can,
how's everything going over there? You good?
And you can do what we call a block up slab. So it's actually a proper house, I guess, with like blocks and a slab. But sometimes you might have an overflow where you cannot actually build a concrete slab, and you have to have the house on stumps. So again, that's why it's really important, even when you buy that block, look at what's been built around, and you will get a really good idea.
Just gauge it from that. Hey?
That's it.
Perfect. Is there anything else you can think of that people really need to know, and what's crucial about knockdown rebuild?
I mean, on top of everything we've talked about, there's what you mentioned at first, the trees.
Yes.
So it's very important too, because trees, well, first of all, if there's really big trees on your block, on the actual block closer to the slab, you really want to try to get rid of them. Because trees as slabs, for those that don't know, do not like trees. Long story short, and I'm not going to go too much into a detail, but the tree is going to suck the moisture out of the ground and causing the slab to crack, because one side of the slab might be moist, the other side is going to get dry, and the slab's going to crack in the middle.
Yeah, you got to try and limit using the word moist on here. Okay, it's just
that's why when you have a lot of trees around your house, an engineer is going to have a lot of peering. To prevent the cracking of the slab. But you might have, for example, on a knockdown rebuild, a massive tree at the front end. And if you do want to get it removed, you have, first of all, to ask the permission from council.
Yeah, that's it. It's not as easy as just when you buy a block, hey, and you just like, oh,
no,
I don't like
that's
that
it.
tree.
And some of those trees are huge.
I wish it was, but
yeah. And so you have to ask permission, and they might even say no, which I guess something to consider. And we've done homes like that where there's such a massive tree at the front where I was talking 1 meter DPA, but the bigger the tree, the more peering your house will have to. And sometimes you might want to try to get council to install the root barrier because, again, everything comes from those roots and them sucking the moisture out of the ground. So that was one. I'm trying to think of more stuff. There is...
we've covered a lot, and it's really like, and it does sound very intense, but at the same time, there is a lot of benefits to knockdown rebuild. It is great. Like, I think it's a great thing to do.
It's probably the best, to be honest, because, I mean, yes, there's a lot of things, and we really have to do that checklist for people. And when we have it, we'll let everybody know. But if you check all the things, you'll be fine. And the best part about it is, in my opinion, I guess anyway, is you can get a great block.
And stamp duty free, by the way.
Is it?
Yeah.
Or if you
rebuild.
Yeah, well, true. Because you don't have, well, it depends. If you buy the block, you're gonna have to pay stamp duty.
Yeah.
But if you own the block, then you're good.
Exactly.
It's a very good point. You usually can get a great block that you really can't get anywhere else because you just can't build new estates in those areas.
That's it.
And in terms of, I guess, profit and the money or the equity that you can make with it, it is phenomenal.
Absolutely.
You cannot get this in a new estate, no matter what the developer is selling you. The best money to be made, whether it's reselling or you're going to rent it out or you just want to build your equity, the best money is with a knockdown rebuild.
100%.
There is no doubt. So, and I know a lot of people might not be into making the money. It's, it's a long-term house, but think about the equity you could build.
Definitely.
And just get ahead as opposed to having a normal house in a normal area. And not being as far ahead, I guess.
And I feel like you're going to do that anyway. Like the nicer suburbs throughout, anywhere, I guess, a lot of them are going to have houses there that have been there for a long time. And the only way for you to be in one of those nice suburbs to up then the value of your house and your assets is to knock down and rebuild.
That's exactly right.
Hamilton, for a prime example.
Definitely. All those suburbs in the inner city of Brisbane are prime example. And the funny thing is, if you haven't done a knockdown rebuild before, and you are going to do one, I guarantee you will get hooked up on it.
Definitely.
Because I know there's a lot of things to watch, but it's fun. Like, it's really fun. It's nicer and more entertaining than building, like, I guess, a normal house in a normal area. And when you see how much money you can make, we have customers that are coming back to us and repeating the process and repeating the process and repeating the process. And the more you do it, the better you get at it.
That's it.
And the more you know exactly what you're doing. So
for sure.
Yeah, I think they are a great way to build a house. But yes, you have to watch what you're doing, and you have, most importantly, you have to get all the information right.
That's it. And hopefully, if you're redoing this again and again and again, after your first one, you've learned definitely what not to do.
Definitely.
What to watch out
for. But at the same time, keep in mind that there can be always surprises.
Definitely.
And usually it has to do with a sewer line, the famous sewer line. So usually it has to do with that. But
this doesn't hold a grudge against those.
No, it's fine. And it's quite annoying that you can't even move them or touch a house connection. I've never understood that, but I get it. But But another thing to watch for example, and I think that's the final thing we're going to talk about, but it's the stormwater. So you have sewer and you also have stormwater. So stormwater is all your downpipes and everything that have to obviously, you have to get the water to the street so that I guess escapes it and doesn't stay next to your house. But in some of those blocks, it can get tricky because, for example, if the street level is here, but your block is here, you're going to have fall to your block, I guess. So there's a few options around it, whether you have what we call a charge line, where the downpipes are pretty much on a sealed system and they fill up until it gets to the street, which would cost a little bit more. Or in some cases too, you might be able to do this with a downpipe, but with a groundwater, you just can't do it. So in some of the knockdown rebuilds, we have to do what we call a rubble pit at the back, so that your water, I guess, is not going to flood onto the sort of neighbors. But there's distances you have to keep too. You can't just have the rubble pit pretty much anywhere. But they are something you also have to watch when you have a knockdown rebuild, particularly if your block is lower than street level.
Definitely. Even like power, like if you have overhead power lines or something like that, that you're going to have to, if power isn't running underground, that you're going to have to possibly even get a power pole.
You might have to get a power pole, and again, they're cheaper than most people think. But depending on how the house is and where it's fitted and the block and the power line, most of the time you can hook up straight onto the power line. The builder usually organizes this. We organize the application through the electrician. Yes, it costs a little bit more. But sometimes, yes, you need to have a power pole, a brand new power pole installed for your property so that you can actually have power to your house. So, yeah.
Perfect. Yeah. Awesome. Well, I think we've tried to keep that short and sweet. Hopefully it didn't overload you a little bit too much and your brain
I'm scared sometimes that we overload people with all that, but I'm like, it is important to also know. So as much as sometimes it is, to a certain extent, boring information.
And in depth or too much maybe.
We are always about trying to be transparent and always about trying to save people money and always about trying to make their life as easy as possible. And particularly with a knockdown rebuild when things can turn wrong pretty quick.
Plus, I feel like that's a hot word at the moment in the real estate and building sort of industry. So
that's exactly right. Super hot word because there's no land, so knockdown rebuilds and buying blocks are hot now. And because houses are selling so good and people are making a ridiculous amount of money on it, it's actually hard to find even a block where you can demolish a house on. But yeah, they are very good. They are a lot of fun. I recommend it, and yeah, that's pretty much it, I guess. So
that's it. So. Everyone, go share this around. Anyone who's interested in doing that sort of thing and the knockdown rebuild sort of game. And we will see you next week with a brand new episode. Thanks for watching.
Sounds good. See ya.